Brilliant.
Great, thanks so much for that, Kinder. Really appreciate that. Now we're going to be talking to George Cathcart, who's social lead at 3 Pipe Reply. And George is going to be talking to us about a slightly broader topic around marketing on LinkedIn, and very simply, what works. George, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm George. I'm from 3 Pipe Reply, and as Ben said, I'm going to be talking about marketing on LinkedIn and what works. So just to set the scene really quickly, the Facebook stack, we're now here to talk about LinkedIn, but I wanted to make a point really about multi-channel perspectives really. And the Facebook stack still does dominate the UK usage. This is from the We Are Social 2020 digital report, and it shows us that the top 5 channels in terms of usage in the UK are within the Facebook stack, and LinkedIn is a little bit further down. And we've seen really good results from using sort of a multi-channel perspective or multi-channel approach when it comes to LinkedIn. So having Facebook in that mix has been really effective. And I'll kind of come on to a little bit later on about why I think that's quite a good way of structuring things for LinkedIn campaigns. Because to LinkedIn, the 2 years running now, it's been voted as the most trusted social platform, which I suppose is to be expected given the professional nature of the service that you get there. But I think that the more important or the more interesting stat for me really is around the 9 billion content impressions per week, which is 15 times more content impressions than job posts on LinkedIn. And obviously, LinkedIn as a platform originally kind of started as a networking tool, and the job function came on a bit later on. But really nowadays it is the content powerhouse that we're seeing. And 94% of B2B marketers are using LinkedIn as a distribution channel. So actually to not have LinkedIn optimized and to be using it effectively is arguably kind of, it's letting your competitors get ahead of you in that regard. It's also growing. So there are 30 million pages on LinkedIn currently, and 100% more engagements from members from a year-on-year perspective. Which for me shows that not only is the number of organisations and the number of people on the platform going up, but actually the amount of people that are having discussions and engaging with each other and engaging with that content is going up as well. So it's certainly not too late to start doing LinkedIn in a better way or kind of in a more sort of focused way. And certainly there's some really sort of promising indications that these are the kind of metrics that we'll kind of continue to see over the near future. And then the last sort of main stat I wanted to pick up on before I go into a bit more detail is around sort of leveraging your immediate network and how it really can pay dividends. So we see that employees are 14 times more likely to share content from their employers than they are from other sources. And actually people within organizations are 60% more likely to engage with each other than they are with people from outside. So actually making sure there's some sort of function within your business to encourage sharing, to encourage people to kind of connect with each other on LinkedIn within your organization is a really good way, is low-hanging fruit really in terms of making sure your presence on LinkedIn is as strong as it possibly can be. So to go on to setting up your presence, and I've got this relatively top line just to kind of keep things relatively simple. But there's some really important things I think that you should be looking to get right to make sure your presence is as effective on LinkedIn as possible, and to make sure your marketing efforts actually reap the rewards. So the first is really simple. It's around completing your page. LinkedIn report that pages with completed information get 30% more views than pages without it. Now you'll be able to tell if your page is incomplete because when you log in as an admin, there'll be a little sort of line at the top that tells you that there are various pieces of information that are still outstanding. Now, some people don't fill those in because they don't think that information is needed, but it's really important to go in and do that. Even if you don't have that information, you can sort of select the box to say, we don't have that information. Making sure that notification goes away and LinkedIn perceives your page to be complete is a really good way and low-hanging fruit of making sure that you get more effect from the channel itself.
George, just slow it down a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
So knowing your audience and building your plan appropriately is really important as well. So we don't want to get anyone into the situation where they're producing content for the sake of content or producing content for an audience who they're not entirely sure who they are. So really understand who it is you're trying to reach, what do you actually want them to do when you actually get content in front of them, and make sure that is really focused for all your planning purposes. Some organizations get a bit distracted, or they'll have multiple different audiences they want to reach, and that's fine. But I think always trying to focus on what your core audience should be and how to reach them effectively is the best way of producing content from an organic perspective. Now, you can obviously do the paid strategies that go on top of that and sort of use those to target different audiences and target those pieces of content accordingly. But it's really important that you kind of understand who you're trying to reach at the beginning, and it does actually pay good dividends to do that early on. Now, building a compelling organic presence is so essential for LinkedIn. It's essential for any social channel, but especially LinkedIn, given sort of the professional context of it, and that people do see it as such a trusted source. So make sure that when you do sort of set up your organic presence there, any time you look at it, it's telling your brand's truest story of who your brand is, what the products are that you're selling, and really the clearest articulation of who you are as a brand and what you're trying to do. The most important thing here is that actually, if someone was to come along and be sort of your perfect target audience member, so someone who fits all the right demographics and the right sort of professional specifications was to come along onto your page, you want them to see content that's really relevant to them and actually speaks to them as a person. We have seen some situations where brands have had sort of different sort of tone of voice and different types of content on there, and it sort of feels a bit distracted and disconnected. So make sure that you kind of regularly check in on your page, put the kind of the persona of your audience in your mind, and make sure that everything on there makes sense for that kind of person. Expanding your reach, so joining those conversations and tapping into trends and news that's going on the platform. It's great to have a content plan and to have that in your mind as you're planning the sort of the months as you go along. But also be reactive, so don't just be sort of a one-stop, sort of two-dimensional shop. The point about reacting to content that's going on news or trends is to show that you are an organization that's got your finger on the pulse, that you understand how the network works, and you understand how content works well. And I think that is really important. And again, we do see some organizations who are very sort of broadcast, very closed off, and not trying to engage in those trends at all. And sometimes that can be sort of detrimental. Giving your employees a voice is also extremely important. It's further to the point I made just now about how employees are more likely to share content from you. Really try to empower the top voices within your organization to have a perspective and to have a view and to sort of flex on their industry expertise for you on your behalf. And also encourage your organization to actually network within each other. So we do see a lot of organizations where actually someone who might be sitting next to someone, they're not even connected on LinkedIn at all. But when you actually have that connection, you have some people networking effectively within your organization and sharing your content out, it makes all your content look much more vibrant, much more active. So when someone does come along who's actually not from your organization and is sort of potentially in your consideration set, they're going to see a much more active and much more pleasant looking experience. No one wants to walk into an empty pub. Including imagery and video in your post is extremely important. I almost didn't put it here because it kind of feels like an obvious point, but we do still see that happening on the feed where imagery and video isn't used, or actually sometimes it's just badly used. So making sure that you actually do that right, and sort of some of the points that have been made already is around, content needs to be effective to actually, content needs to be good to actually be effective and actually deliver any value. So using images will typically result in 2 times higher comments, and videos will get 5 times more engagement on LinkedIn. So wherever possible, try and use those as much as you can do. And the last thing really is around setting out the stall. It's kind of similar to the first point, but there's a bit of nuance here. In that, there are so many pages on LinkedIn, and often an organization will have different arms or different product sets, and there'll be a need for maybe a separate showcase page or separate business arm pages. It's really important to make sure all those pages are connected up using the affiliate pages function, so that if someone is searching for your presence, they see that you are kind of an organization that understands how to use LinkedIn as a tool effectively, and you can kind of see all the different connections that there are there. It's just another way of showing how you're taking LinkedIn seriously, and you're a professional organization that understands how to use the tool well. Now, there's some discussion around LinkedIn groups and whether they are an effective tool for businesses. Shouting into an empty room is certainly some ways the way that we can see it, but I think there's 4 kind of main things to be thinking of in terms of how you sort of evaluate whether groups are something that would be good for you. So how busy and loud is the space? So, depending on the vertical you're in or the specialism that you're in, you may well already know of a number of groups that that are active or that exist. Now, I would suggest you go away and have a look at some of those groups and search through the posts on there. So I'm a member of a number of groups from a number of 1,000 people within the groups all the way up to sort of 50,000 people in the group. And actually, sometimes it's the groups with the more members where there's just nothing really going on, just people posting up content and not reacting to each other, not having any conversations. It may look like a really fertile opportunity for you to sort of start posting content on there. But when there's no one doing anything and just sort of effectively screaming into the void, it's just a waste of your time and a waste of effort. Does your service or product naturally require additional support or discussion? So let's say you're a software business or you're a digital product business, and there's a certain amount of aftercare or additional help that can be delivered to people that use your service. LinkedIn groups can be a fantastic way of doing that. So especially where you build up that group to a certain level, people within that group will start to help each other, and you don't necessarily have to do all of the help yourself. And it's especially good for things like when you have to deliver things like change logs or sort of bug reports or new tips and new features and things like that. It's a really nice way of sort of having a bit of a closer connection to the people that are using your product on a day-to-day basis. Do you have the appropriate resources to support discussions? Now, this is really a question around how much resource do you have at all in any sort of social sort of setting. But where LinkedIn is interesting is that, as we said earlier on, when you actually start to engage in those conversations and have an active voice, that's where you start to see the most results. So if you don't have the capacity to sort of have an eye on half an eye on a group that you're using or investing in, and sort of have the ability to sort of invest in a bit more time into it when discussions get interesting or if there's a bit more going on, then you could actually be causing damage by not being present and not being able to kind of sit there and respond to people when they need to be responded to. And the last point is around, are there communities and groups that are already there that you can add value to? So let's say you found a group which is active and there's ongoing discussion there, and you sort of see some transient or some hooks into the product that you provide. Don't just go in there and start plastering your product and messaging everywhere. There are paid tools to do that, and there are definitely better ways of doing it elsewhere on the platform. But if there's something where you can add value or add a perspective to a conversation, go in and absolutely do that, and start to kind of build a reputation or build up your sort of visibility as an organization that will help in the space rather than just sort of tell everyone to buy your products. So this is just some 4 sort of top line thinking areas to consider before you look at whether LinkedIn groups is a good use of your time and resources. Now, to take you on to kind of what works and what doesn't, a bit more kind of the meat of the bones to this presentation. I'm going to go through some of the themes. So the first one is around readable infographics, and not just icons and stats. Now, infographics themselves, obviously they've been around for a long time, especially in the content marketing space, but they work really well on LinkedIn if you do them well. So this example here on the left is a lovely infographic. Actually, when you first look at the video, it's a bit hard to read, but then it sort of starts to flick through and you see each one in turn. And it's a really nice way of showing off kind of in this instance, their services around COVID-19 and how you can still shoot video. But it's a really good way of kind of showing a sort of relatively complex message in a short space of time. But absolutely don't just plaster up an infographic that's been designed for a website and then just hope that it will work on LinkedIn, because it probably won't. People and culture is also a really effective way of kind of building up a bit of content around stuff that isn't that direct sell piece of what you do. So it has a few things here that it will do. So staff retention, it'll help sort of give people that are within the organisation the chance of being featured. If they do, then they'll feel really proud about that moment where they're kind of being highlighted for the work they do in the organisation. For talent acquisition, it's a similar thing. So they'll see that people within the organisation are valued and are highlighted when they do the good work that they do. And then from a business reputation perspective as well, it shows that you're an organisation that looks after your people, that has value and applies value to the people that you have within the business. And it's almost a second level signal that if they see you looking after your staff well, then as a client, they'll probably be looked after well as well. Trend remixing. So I made a point earlier about keeping an eye on the trends and the things that are going on at the time. Obviously with COVID, there's been a lot of Zoom calls going on, and some organizations have started to remix this kind of Zoom persona piece of content. Now, this is a very light touch kind of, very top funnel piece of content, but it's just another way of showing that you're paying attention, that you have a view, that you have a perspective into kind of the content that's going on LinkedIn, and it's a bit of fun. A few content maxims to live by. So respecting the line break ellipsis is so important. Less so, I mean, there was a point in time when Facebook brought that in, and people kind of just sort of ignored it. And to a larger or lesser degree, that hasn't had a huge result on the effectiveness of it. But on LinkedIn, it can really, really hurt your engagement and really hurt your messaging if you don't respect it. So James Watt at Brewdog, in fact, I just absolutely advocate to go and check out James Watt and Brewdog in general on LinkedIn, because they do some fantastic stuff, and they're almost a masterclass on how to do LinkedIn well. So the way they've designed this is so brilliant. So you get the first part of the message, which is all displayed on 2 lines, and there's additional content there which if you want to go and read it, but you don't need to understand what they're trying to say, and it's below the line break. Virgin Money here, for example, have done a similar thing. They try to use the line break to kind of add a bit of sort of staccato to the copy as you're reading it, but actually it gets ellipses at the end of that sentence, and you don't really know what the financial happiness report is about, aside from just inferring that it's about financial happiness. So really try and respect that line break ellipsis. Test things as you're publishing them. If they don't look quite right, then edit them before they go, before it's been out for too long, because it does make a difference. Using consistent color palettes is also really effective. Partly from a feed blindness perspective, like you don't want people to just scroll through and not see your content, so try and use bright colors where possible, but also try and link your colors from your logo to the content that you're publishing, especially if it's graphic designed. It just makes it look more professional, it jumps out in the feed, and people are more likely to stop them as they come through. So FIFO, for example, a lovely example here. Sugar CRM, similar things, so the colors are consistent, a bit more nuanced or a bit more subtle, but it's still really nice to see that link between the two. Pacing video appropriately and designing the standoff is important. So this video from another organization who do some really fantastic video content on LinkedIn. So the thing here is that the movement doesn't stop. Some of this is stock video, so it's not even that hard to produce, but it just keeps moving throughout the transitions. The transitions themselves are only 4 seconds long, so the pace is really nice, easy for you to understand. It's not too quick, it's not too slow. I think it's really important to sort of bear that in mind whenever you're designing video content. Designing the sound off is obviously really important as well in kind of the space that we're in. And the other point I want to make is about laying off the hard sell. Now, obviously there's a time and a place to kind of push your more direct response messaging or messaging which is really further down towards actually consideration and conversion. But sometimes it's really important also to have that transient content that sits around what you're trying to do. You know, if you're going to sell horse saddles, you don't sell them horse saddles, you sell them the vision of riding across a prairie with the sun on your back. So it's really important to have that stuff that kind of pads out around the side. So Blue Digital here, for example, are a digital recruitment agency, and they've produced a bunch of content really around avoiding burnout from working at home. And it's really nice to see, because they're also not trying to make you go for a role. They're not trying to sell you clients or sell you candidates. They're just trying to help people out in the situation that they find themselves. And I think it's really important to kind of look for those opportunities where you possibly can do. A few examples of some non-optimized content. I've hidden the names here just to kind of avoid upsetting anyone. But so a few things will come into here. So too much copy, again, we spoke earlier. Don't force that ellipsis line break. It just looks messy and you miss a lot of what you're trying to say. The copy here in the image is too small for someone to read, especially on a mobile device. So always think about what the mobile device will look like. If possible, always preview things on a mobile as well. And then the light colors here, they blend into the feed, so there's a bit of feed blindness falling in here. And obviously they've got the download link here, but ultimately this piece of content probably could be much more effective if you followed some of the previous maxims and suggestions. Stimuli thing here, so the pull-through image failed, and I see this day in, day out where this has happened. If it does happen, all you have to do is delete the post and retry, and if it happens again, then upload the image manually. It just delivers so much more impact, and arguably it could be damaging if someone sees something like this come through their feed. This here has got a branded hashtag. You have to take my word for it. I didn't want to call anyone out. But don't use branded hashtags. There's no point, especially on LinkedIn. It's just a waste of time and effort, and it doesn't do anything better for your posts. And where you are going to use images of people, just make sure the images are of a really high quality, and you think about how it will look in the feed. So we've got this big grey bar here, which is a window, which is a wall on the left of the lady with red hair, and the gentleman's got his head cut off at the top. So it just doesn't display very well, and it looks unprofessional, and that's the response that someone will get. And then this is an example, and we don't actually see too much in some LinkedIn, but just don't do things like this. It's a professional network first and foremost. So messages to fathers talking about Happy Father's Day is just completely irrelevant. That's the stuff that you should be putting out on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. It's completely nothing pointless, and just don't do it. It's a waste of your time. So just to kind of finish up really on a few extra points. So firstly is kind of like why LinkedIn is expensive. And I think it kind of really depends on how you look at it. So when we run LinkedIn campaigns, and as I said, we tend to do them hand in hand with Facebook where possible. We see our CPMs running about 4 to 8 times higher than that on Facebook, which obviously at first glance seems more expensive. But actually, when you start to think about it, LinkedIn is a professional network. It's already been narrowed to a certain degree. People are only on there for a professional reason. And you've already kind of, if you were to build a professional audience on Facebook, you would see your CPM start to go up because you're already trying to cut out people who are there for leisure and kind of other reasons on the platform. There's a higher degree of relevance for professional context, especially in the B2B space. If you're selling professional services, you want to be selling them within a professional context. And LinkedIn, for that reason, is more expensive, but actually it makes it more effective anyway when you get that message to them. So again, arguably, the expense there isn't actually different. It just means you're getting a higher quality of results. And then there's better data for professionals. You know, if someone's on LinkedIn, they want to make sure that their profile and their perspective is as true to who they are as a professional as they possibly can do. On Facebook, they don't care whether it says they work at X, Y, Z or not. But on LinkedIn, it does. So the quality of the data there is so much better. So when you're actually targeting, you can kind of have a better degree of confidence in it. Whereas on Facebook, there's a lot more wastage in how you sort of target professionals. And then the last thing I want to highlight really is why we see sort of paid on LinkedIn as almost the final piece of the puzzle. And so I kind of see it as a foundational perspective really. So the first part is the hiding stuff, the stuff I referred to earlier on, making sure your page setup is done well, making sure you get signposting done well, making sure you've got pixels and first party data all set up and done properly if that's something that's appropriate to you. We haven't talked about that in this. But that is something that's important to do and kind of at the baseline. And also making sure the content strategy is effective, that it's aimed at the people you want to be reaching, you understand what that content is supposed to be doing for those people at certain stages of their consideration funnel that they may be in. The next part is advocates. So again, that low-hanging fruit, making sure that you're encouraging people within your organization to share your updates. If they want to have a view or a perspective on something, give them the agency to go and do that. Encourage them to network with each other. And encourage them to kind of make those pieces of content look like active and engaged pieces of content. That means that when you do finally get that content out to someone, so when you do switch on your page, and you're delivering that content to target audiences, when they finally see that piece of content on their feed, they're seeing there's activity there, they're seeing there's people engaging with each other, and actually it looks like a much warmer place to go and sort of spend time or engage with or kind of click through, for example. As I said, no one likes to walk into an empty pub. And it's just about making sure that when they do finally see that content, they feel comfortable in engaging with it. So that's the whistle-stop tour really of how we see marketing on LinkedIn working well. And I hope you have enjoyed it.
George, thanks so much for that. Just a couple of quick questions from me. Just on the organic side, first of all, just for people who are relatively new to this on LinkedIn, what are the choices of our channels? We've got timelines and groups, and I guess company page. Are those the three, or am I missing something?
So you can also have showcase pages where they come in, and showcase pages are better for if you have a specific product within your business, or if you have a specific arm that's kind of separate to your core operation. So trying to think of an example. So, for example, an Oracle Marketing Cloud may have a showcase page for one of their software solutions, which is separate to them as an organization. But generally speaking, I would say that you can do most things with just a straight up company page, and the nuance or additional complexity in running multiple pages in multiple situations is arguably not worth the time that you put into it until you get to a position where you're a very, very large organization and you're running
Right. Because
thousands,
I find
thousands of dollars worth of media
just with PR Moments pages, the group is what we've sort of concentrated on over the years, and that's has reasonable engagement. It's not great, but it has an audience. But
Sure.
when in terms of the tagging of the page, it's much easier when people seem to just naturally connect to the PR Moment company page, if you see what I mean. But it's quite hard. I can't remember now the functionality difference of each in terms of a company page and a group, but it seems to me the group has better functionality, but almost the company page is easier for people to find. So it's quite a difficult one, I find, whether to decide whether which one I'd try and dedicate the most resource to.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it really depends, again, on what your ultimate objective is. So if you want to be encouraging people to have active discussions and share ideas and connect with each other and connect with you on a sort of more personal level, then the group is definitely worth more in that regard. I think from just the way LinkedIn is built, I think it naturally would lend itself to tagging an organization rather than a group, just because of the way it's set up. So I don't think you'll ever get around that.
And finally, you mentioned hashtags. I'm a bit confused with hashtags on LinkedIn. I never used to do them. I definitely, there's no doubt the branded hashtag is a waste of time. But if it's, I don't know, if it's a hashtag like, I don't know, tech or technology or COVID or public relations, so more natural hashtags, are they useful or are they not that great on LinkedIn either?
I would say the jury's a little bit out on it. You certainly don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're hashtag stuffing, similar to how you would have seen on Instagram, and how sort of influencers go a bit crazy. In fact, everyone goes crazy for hashtags on Instagram. I would say if it makes sense and it's relevant to what you're saying, then absolutely include them. There's no harm in it. But don't go mad. I think the impact you'll see from it is fairly small at best, but it can sometimes help other people who are reading your content to add additional context or to understand a bit better about what area you're talking about. So use them, but don't expect them to kind of change everything in a fundamental way.
And just final question for me for video, which I know we're talking about a bit later on in this webinar, but video from your timeline needs to be relatively short. I think the technical limit is 10 minutes, but presumably it should be less, and it needs to have subtitles, does it?
I would certainly advocate for using subtitles if it's applicable. As I said, designing for stand-up is really important. I think it's less so, arguably, at the moment, given that everyone's working from home and probably working from their computers more so than they would have been. But certainly designing for mobile first and foremost is always going to be the most effective way of doing it. And in terms of length, again, it's kind of down to testing what really works for you as a business. And you may end up finding you get things like, if you wanted to highlight an event or a speaker slot that someone has done within your organization, then obviously that lends itself to a longer video. But if you just want to get moving pictures and images to sort of distribute a message to someone, then sort of 15 to 30 seconds is probably a pretty good length for LinkedIn.
I mean, I just think about my own personal usage. I don't think I've ever watched a video for more than a couple of minutes on LinkedIn. So, but I guess if the content's compelling enough, then maybe. Yeah,
I mean, it does depend, I suppose, on the content itself. But yeah, I think anything over a minute, you're going to be dropping off quite a lot.
Sure. Okay. So a minute is, I mean, obviously, as ever with these things, it's how long is a piece of string to an extent. Yeah. But anything over a minute it starts to get a bit difficult.
I mean, we've also seen some good results from running a LinkedIn Live and then sharing that LinkedIn Live back into the feed and then putting paid spend behind it. So those are obviously going to be longer videos, but we do still see some good results from doing them. Sure. The drop will still usually be there, or will definitely be higher than if it was an actual live stream.
We're going to come on to a presentation a bit later on about the broadcast stuff, but that's interesting. From a LinkedIn Live perspective, as far as I understand it, the technicalities of it, LinkedIn have kind of made relatively simple, haven't they? Putting on a LinkedIn live session, but obviously that needs to be reliable and good quality. The content production around it is the most important element. But when it comes to promoting that, I guess before, during, and after, have you got a few sort of tips on that, or how does that work?
I think it can be tricky. We tend to just go with a fairly simple kind of couple of days before, get people to know that they need to be looking out for it, and then post an update relatively soon before it goes live, so they can again keep an eye out for it. I suppose the reality is that it's not that easy to kind of put up like a premiere and say that it's about to happen, especially not as much as it is on Facebook, although those things I expect will change. I think, you know, again, and this is kind of where the organic or your follower base can come into better effect, is that if you do have a large organization, a large number of people following you, you're much more likely to kind of be putting those guys in. Whereas if you're running a LinkedIn Live with a page with 1,000 followers, you're going to struggle, however you do it. So it's a bit of an interesting one.
But it's kind of it's a lesson really, I suppose, on the fact that you can't just do these things in isolation. You've got to build up your audience across whichever pages or groups or personal contacts you think is right for you, and then feed that content in, and LinkedIn Live might be a part of that strategy in essence, but
exactly.
it's probably not in isolation.
No, I mean, that's very true. And actually, you know, in some of the LinkedIn Lives we've worked with, the organizations had a really, really large Twitter following. So we'll put up a post on Twitter saying we've got LinkedIn Live happening in 5 minutes, or it's happening now. And you do pull in quite a few people from that. So again, it goes back to what I was saying about having a multi-channel approach, really. So making sure you have at least got those other channels in play and that you are sort of in the background keeping them active. You can actually pull in engagement and users from those situations when you're doing something like a live stream.
Brilliant. George Cathcart from 3Pipe Reply, thank you so much.
No worries.